For over 6 years. James Miller, a quiet 72-year-old retired librarian from Kansas, suffered from something he never dared speak about. An itch. Deep inside his nose. Not just annoying, relentless. It kept him up at night, made him avoid family dinners, and robbed him of peace. Doctors called it allergies, dry air, maybe nerves. But nothing worked. And then, one rainy afternoon in September 2022, something changed. James sneezed. Hard. What came out left even the emergency room nurse speechless. What had been living inside him wasn't human. And it had been there for years. Just imagine, could something like this be living in you right now? Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. James Miller lived a quiet life in the small town of Abilene, Kansas, the kind of place where mail still comes with a smile and people wave at passing cars. Every morning, like clockwork, James brewed his single cup of black coffee, opened the newspaper, and sat by the front window, listening to the chirping sparrows outside. A man of habit, he rarely strayed from his routines. Retired from the library since 2015, James spent his days tending to a modest garden and writing letters to his granddaughter in Oregon. But something had begun to shift. Subtle at first. A tickle, a twitch, a strange sensation just behind his left nostril. He told himself it was nothing, just dust or spring air. But that tiny itch never really went away. And one day, it started to grow bolder. It started with a sneeze. Not a regular one, sharp, sudden, almost violent. James was pruning his tomato vines when it hit him like a jolt. His eyes watered. His hands shook. But what startled him most was what came out. Not mucus, something dry. Flaky. Almost like tiny wings. Confused, he wiped his nose and blamed the pollen. But from that day on, the itch turned persistent. Sometimes, it pulsed at night. Other times, it tickled like something moving, deeper inside. He tried everything, saline sprays, allergy meds, even sleeping upright. But the feeling didn't stop. And when he looked in the mirror one morning and saw a faint, reddish line just inside his nostril, like a tiny scratch, he knew something was off. He just didn't know how off it really was. Days turned into weeks, and James could no longer ignore it. The itch had evolved, no longer just a nuisance, but a sensation of movement. A crawling. Especially at night. He started waking up at 2 or 3 a.m., nose twitching, heart pounding. Sometimes, he swore he heard something. A faint clicking sound. Like tiny legs tapping bone. He stopped gardening. Stopped calling his granddaughter. Neighbors noticed, the friendly wave from the porch became a closed curtain. One morning, as he leaned in to trim his nose hair, he spotted something. A glint. Like the shimmer of a shell, far inside the dark curve of his nostril. He blinked, leaned closer, but it was gone. Or had it ever been there? James wasn't sure anymore. But something was happening. Something alive. On a chilly morning in late October, James finally broke. After waking up with a drop of blood on his pillow and a dull pressure behind his eye, he drove himself to the nearest urgent care, something he hadn't done in years. The nurse listened patiently, though her brow tightened with each detail. Then came the nasal exam. As the doctor leaned in with the scope, his expression shifted. From routine, to confusion, to concern. "I see something," he muttered. He called in another physician. More lights. More tools. Silence. Then a photo was taken, and James was asked to wait. In that small, sterile room, his breath quickened. The image on the screen looked like a leg. Segmented. Curved. Not human. Not explainable. The doctor didn't smile. He didn't joke. "We need to refer you," he said. But refer him to what, exactly? The ENT specialist in Wichita was calm, almost too calm. He reviewed the scans, asked questions James couldn't answer, like whether he traveled abroad recently, or spent time in old barns or attics. Then he paused and showed James an enlarged image. There, nestled deep within the left nasal cavity, was a shape unmistakably organic, curled, jointed, with tiny spines. A foreign body. Possibly, insectoid. James's stomach twisted. It's not common, the doctor admitted. But it appears to be alive. Or it was. Panic rose in James like a tide. How could something live inside him for this long? How didn't anyone see it before? The thought made him dizzy. Suddenly, it wasn't just an itch. It was an invasion. A secret that had been feeding off him, inside him, for years. And worst of all, it still wasn't clear what it was. Surgery was scheduled. Minor, they said. Just a nasal extraction under local anesthesia. But James couldn't sleep the night before. Not from fear of the operation, but from what he felt. Movement. Stronger now. Angry, almost. As if the thing inside knew. That morning, as he sat in the sterile pre-op room, the doctor hesitated. There's a chance, he said slowly, that removing it could cause internal bleeding. Or worse, if it's attached. James felt cold sweat trickle down his spine. Attached? How could it attach? He was offered a choice, to delay and run more tests, or proceed. And in that moment, facing the unknown, he whispered, "Take it out." He'd lived with fear too long. But as they wheeled him in, something clicked in his head. What if it wasn't alone? What if it had laid eggs? The moment the forceps entered his nasal passage, James felt it, a sharp, blinding jolt that shot through his skull. The monitors beeped, nurses froze. Blood, sudden, dark, too much for something so small. The surgeon muttered, "It's moving." Then, a sound. A clicking. From inside. Not mechanical, biological. The team backed off. For a split second, everyone in the room thought the same thing: this thing doesn't want to leave. James faded in and out, his mind spiraling through panic and flashes of childhood, bike rides, his late wife's laughter, his granddaughter's first steps. And then, silence. When he awoke, it was over. A specimen jar sat nearby. Inside, was a beetle. Black, hardened, alien. Still. Not dead, just still. It was alive, whispered the nurse. We don't know how it survived. Or, why it chose you. But James was awake now. And he wasn't done asking questions. In the days that followed, James became something he hadn't been in years, curious. The beetle, now frozen in a lab vial, was unlike anything local entomologists had seen. It resembled a rare species found in humid jungles of Southeast Asia, but James had never left Kansas. How it got there, how it survived for years without killing him, no one could explain. But something changed in James. He started reading again. Researching. Writing. He contacted a university biologist, who confirmed a disturbing theory: the beetle may have entered through his sinuses as a larva, and grown. Slowly. Quietly. Feeding off his body heat. But James didn't feel horror anymore. He felt awe. That something could live inside him, unknown for so long, and that he survived it. He had faced the darkness, and walked out stronger. Wiser. Alive. James never looked at silence the same way again. What once was just peace and routine, now felt like a space where the unthinkable could grow. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He started volunteering at the local library again, sharing his story, carefully, without drama. Just truth. Not everyone believed him. Some laughed. But others leaned in, eyes wide, noses twitching. And every so often, James would ask them, softly, when was the last time you really paid attention to what your body's trying to tell you? Because here's the thing, how many of us ignore the itch? The twitch? The whisper of something not quite right? Could there be something inside you, right now, waiting to be found? Think twice, and maybe take a closer look. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, what's the weirdest thing your body's ever done, that you couldn't explain?